The world was a blur of cold, churning water and a colder, more distant shore. My lungs screamed, burning for a breath that would only fill them with the sea. My arms, heavy as lead, flailed weakly against the inevitable pull. And on the shore, standing as still as a statue, was my husband, Julian Vance. He watched me drown. Not with panic, not with horror, but with an expression of utter, bored contempt. The man who had loved me like I was his entire world for 23 years simply watched my world end. "Stop pretending to be pitiful, Isabella." His voice carried across the water, cold and sharp, cutting deeper than the icy Atlantic. "I gave you over 2 decades of a luxurious life as Mrs. Vance. That should be more than enough repayment for whatever you think you've done. The only person I truly owe is your cousin Celeste. She's the one I've always loved. She stayed silently by my side for 10 years, sacrificing her own happiness, just so I wouldn't be in a difficult position." The waves pulled me under for a moment. I fought my way back to the surface, choking, my vision spotting. Then came the final cruel blow. "You'd better really be drowning this time. It would be perfect for everyone. Perfect for him. Perfect for Celeste." The ultimate betrayal wasn't just his. My own son Leo, who had just started his freshman year at Stanford, had stood beside his father on the patio just moments before I'd stumbled and fallen from the cliff walk. His words echoed in my waterlogged ears, each one a shard of glass in my heart. "Don't worry about her, Dad. Aunt Celeste is the one who really cares about us. She's the one who's been managing the company's European division all these years. You should marry her. Mom would have given her blessing too." Blessing? I would have given my life for him. And I worked tirelessly for that family, for that company, for that man. I smoothed his rough edges, taught him the social graces he lacked as the illegitimate son of a banking magnate, and whispered the strategies that built his empire. For over 20 years I was the invisible scaffolding holding up his world. And in the end they were ready to throw my body to the fish. The fury was a final white-hot spark in my chest. I was so enraged I couldn't catch my breath. The water finally won, and my last conscious thought was not of love, but of a searing, all-consuming hatred. I died from suffocation, my eyes wide open. The sensation was not of an ending, but a violent rewinding. A blinding light, a soundless scream, and then, silence. I opened my eyes. I was lying in my old 4-poster bed in my girlhood room. The morning sun streamed through the bay window, illuminating dancing dust motes. The familiar scent of my father's pipe tobacco and the roses from the garden below wafted in. It was serene. It was impossible. My heart hammered against my ribs. I sat bolt upright, my hands flying to my face, my chest. I was dry. I was breathing. I was young. A soft knock came at the door. "Bella? Sweetheart, are you awake?" It was my father's voice, warm and concerned. "Julian is here. He's downstairs with your mother and I. He says he needs to speak with us all. Together." A cold dread, colder than the ocean that killed me, washed over me. I knew this day. I had relived it in my dreams for years, a touchstone of my happiness. It was the day Julian Vance came to my home to propose. Scrambling out of bed, I pulled on a silk robe and crept to the top of the grand staircase. Peering down into the sunlit foyer, I saw them. My father, Alistair Croft, stood with his back straight, a kind but puzzled smile on his face. My mother, Eleanor, looked on with hopeful anticipation. And Julian. He looked so young. But the look he gave the room wasn't one of nervous love. It was full of impatience and a thinly veiled disgust, as if he were standing in a barn, not a mansion. Before my father could offer a greeting, Julian stepped forward, his voice cutting through the pleasantries. "Mr. Croft, Mrs. Croft," he began, his tone brisk, businesslike. "I appreciate you seeing me. But I'm here to correct a long-standing misunderstanding." My blood ran cold. This wasn't how it happened. "The one I love," he declared, his voice ringing with a conviction I now recognized as arrogance, "is Celeste. Please, grant me your blessing to marry her." In that moment, staring down at his proud, entitled face, I understood. The universe had given us both a second chance. But where mine was a gift, his was an opportunity to correct a perceived mistake. Julian had been reborn too. My father was trembling, pointing a shaking finger at Julian, too angry to speak. But Julian's eyes weren't on my outraged father. They were glued to Celeste, who stood just behind my parents in the doorway to the drawing room, having conveniently stopped by for breakfast. Jeez. I'd seen it before. In my last life, when I'd invited my poor orphaned cousin to live with us, Julian had looked at her the same way. Obsessed. Praised. Unhinged. Mr. Croft, I made the wrong choice before, Julian continued, his voice dripping with a newfound sense of destiny. Celeste is my true soulmate. My other half. He turned his head, finally casting a disdainful glance up the stairs toward me. Isabella's kind. But she is boring. Dull. Flavorless. I want to create a real business empire, a legend with a woman of vision and fire by my side. I want Celeste. He had the gall to smile. Besides, Celeste has been living in your house for years. She's practically like your daughter. This should be an easy transition. My father's chest rose and fell rapidly in fury. He reached for the antique phone on the hall table to call security, his face a thundercloud. But I stopped him. Wait. My voice, clear and steady, echoed in the high-ceilinged foyer. I walked down the stairs, each step measured and calm. My father looked at me stunned. Julian froze too, then curved his lips into a mocking smile. He must have thought I would beg him again like a lovesick fool, just as I had in the last life. He stepped closer, offering a condescending solution. Isabella, even though we can't be married, I see your distress. I can be generous. I'll hire you as my personal assistant. Name your salary. Anything you want. After all, you've been dedicated to me for so long. The air turned dead silent. My father's face went from red to a dark, livid purple. But I smiled. A cold, sharp smile that didn't reach my eyes. I gently moved my father's hand away from the phone and walked, step by step, toward Julian. I stopped in front of the face I had once loved for over 20 years, looked him straight in the eye and said calmly, a bastard son who had to climb his way up through marriage. I never respected that path before. I paused, the curve of my lips deepening into a smirk. Now I despise it. I saw Julian's face freeze in shock. The arrogant mask slipped, revealing pure, unadulterated confusion. This wasn't his script. Then I turned to my father. Dad, I don't want to dirty my eyes here any longer. I'm going upstairs to change. But I didn't go to my own room. I walked straight to Celeste's. A burning, urgent need filled me. I had to see her. I had to know. Had I been blind to her true nature from the very start? The door to her room was half closed. I could hear her inside, speaking in a hushed, excited voice on the phone. I got him, Maya. He said it right in front of everyone. He wants to marry me. Her tone was full of smug pride. Isabella? She's just a pretty clueless doll. What does she know about business? About powerful men? I just copied her outfits, mimicked the way she talks, and grabbed a few of her drafts from her private computer. I tweaked them a bit, and Julian now thinks I'm some kind of genius soulmate, a business prodigy. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. I clutched the doorframe for support. She laughed, a light, tinkling sound that now sounded like shattering glass. He has no idea that every word he praises me for actually belongs to that dumb Isabella. Pa, just wait. Once I marry into the Vance family, the first thing I'll do is hand over the Croft family's company to my parents. It's the least they deserve after what they've been through. I froze where I stood. So that's how it was. My ideas, my work, my family's legacy, stolen by a thief and handed to my greedy aunt and uncle. Everything we had worked so hard for had become a cruel joke to an ungrateful traitor. While I was still reeling in shock, a hand shot out and grabbed my wrist tightly. I hadn't even noticed Julian following me upstairs. His face was twisted with rage and disgust. Isabella, I'm warning you, he hissed, his grip like a vice. Don't even think about hurting Celeste. He was convinced I had come to cause trouble for her. His eyes were full of contempt. Drop the jealousy. Celeste's talent is beyond anything you could ever comprehend. 3 days from now at the Ethelred Capital Venture Summit, she'll amaze everyone. You'd better accept reality and stop humiliating yourself. Julian was convinced that his second chance at life existed solely to correct his mistakes and embrace his true love. He truly believed his success in the last life had all come from Celeste, the mastermind behind it all. As I stared at his arrogant, idiotic face, rage boiled inside me. But I forced a smile, one that made him hesitate for a moment. Sure, I said calmly. I'm looking forward to it. I wanted him to watch. I wanted to see everything he believed in, everything he placed his hopes on, shatter right before his eyes. The 3 days leading up the Ethelred Capital Venture Summit were a study in quiet, seething preparation. The Croft mansion, usually a place of warm, understated elegance, felt like a gilded cage filled with landmines. My father, Alistair, vacillated between volcanic rage and a deep, worried concern for my mental state. He'd find me sitting calmly in the library reviewing financial reports from years ago, and his face would crumple. "Bella, my dear girl," he'd say, his voice rough with emotion. "You don't have to be strong for me. That creature, his betrayal." "It's not strength, Dad," I'd reply, looking up from a spreadsheet detailing the early growth of Croft Industries. "It's clarity. I see everything perfectly now." My mother, Eleanor, fluttered around me, bringing trays of tea and little sandwiches I didn't touch. Her sadness was a quiet, confused thing. She couldn't comprehend the venom in Julian's words or Celeste's duplicity. To her it was a tragic romance gone wrong. Celeste, for her part, played her role to perfection. She moved through the house with a mask of tragic guilt, her eyes perpetually red-rimmed as if she'd been crying. She tried to corner me, to offer tearful, convoluted apologies that were really just exercises in self-justification. "Oh, Isabella, I never meant for this to happen," she whispered outside my bedroom door one evening, her voice a masterclass in faux anguish. My heart, it overruled my head. Our connection was just too powerful to deny. "You must understand a love like this." I opened the door, cutting her off. She flinched, expecting a slap, a scream, tears. She was prepared to play the victim to my hysterical scorn. I merely looked at her, my expression blank. "You should get some rest, Celeste," I said, my voice flat. "You'll need to be sharp. Wouldn't want to forget your lines at the big show." Her face went slack with confusion, then tightened with a flicker of fear before she rearranged it into wounded dignity. "I don't know what you mean." "I'm sure you don't," I said and closed the door. I spent my time in the mansion's secure home office, accessed by a key only my father and I possessed. I wasn't just reviewing old files. I was excavating. My past life's knowledge was a treasure trove. I knew which projects would boom, which would bust, and the exact minute details of Julian's early business strategies I had devised. And I knew about the Codex. It was my magnum opus from my final year at university. A project so forward-thinking my professors had called it unrealistic. It was a comprehensive plan for an integrated digital platform that merged social connectivity with micro-investment opportunities. I'd shelved it, planning to refine it after I'd gained more real-world experience. Experience I'd never gotten because I'd thrown myself into building Julian's empire instead. In this new timeline, I had updated it, refined it, and given it a new name, Solaris. And 3 weeks ago, long before Julian's dramatic proposal, I had quietly registered the intellectual property and submitted the executive summary to the Ethelred Capital Venture Summit's anonymous portal. It was my insurance policy. Now it was about to become my weapon. The night before the summit, my father found me in the office. "Bella," he said, his voice heavy. "You don't have to go tomorrow. We can avoid the spectacle. I can have my lawyers." "No," I said, shutting down the computer. "I have to be there. I need to see their faces." The Ethelred Capital Venture Summit was the social and financial event of the season. The venue was a cathedral of modern wealth, all gleaming chrome, glass walls, and impossible floral arrangements. The air hummed with the sound of money, ambition, and carefully modulated laughter. I walked in alone, my spine straight, wearing a simple, devastatingly elegant black gown that screamed of old money and quiet confidence. I instantly became the center of attention. Not because of who I was, but because of the scandalous story that had already spread through the elite circle like wildfire. The whispers were a palpable force. "There she is. Poor thing." "Poor? Please, she's humiliated. Her own cousin. Did you hear?" Julian Vance called her boring and flavorless to her father's face. Well, he's not wrong. Celeste Stone is a revelation. A once-in-a-generation mind, they say. Of course he chose her. I ignored them all, accepting a flute of champagne from a passing waiter without seeing him. My eyes scanned the crowd, cold and assessing. And then I found them. Julian and Celeste were holding court near the center of the room. He looked triumphant, his arm possessively around her waist. She was preening, basking in the flattery of the sycophants who already sensed the shift in power and were aligning themselves with the new rising star. They noticed me. A hush fell over their little group. With a smirk, Julian led Celeste through the crowd, a king and queen approaching a peasant. "Isabella," Julian said, his voice dripping with condescending pity. "I'm surprised you came. I thought you'd have more pride." He gestured around the opulent room. "Do you see now? This is the world that belongs to me and Celeste. All you're good for is looking up at us from the audience. I took a slow sip of champagne. Julian, I replied, my voice calm. Have you ever heard of the term, killing with praise? His smug smile faltered. Still playing tough? He scoffed, though his eyes narrowed. He was thrown. This wasn't the broken, pleading woman he'd expected. His eyes went cold as he pointed to the hem of Celeste's gown. Since you're here, make yourself useful. Go fix her gown. It's trailing. Do that, and I'll consider you truly here to offer your blessings. He leaned in, his voice a venomous whisper. When the summit's over and I'm in a good mood, maybe I'll let you join the company as a team leader. Consider it charity. It was a calculated, brutal humiliation. Celeste tugged gently at his arm, a troubled look plastered on her face. Julian, don't be like that. Isabella is still family after all. I don't deserve such respect. Her words said one thing, but her body leaned forward ever so slightly, practically radiating anticipation at the thought of me, the woman she'd betrayed, kneeling at her feet. Watching their coordinated performance made my stomach churn. Just then the stage lights came up, saving me from a reply I might have regretted. The senior vice president of Ethelred Capital, a severe-looking woman named Dr. Evans, walked onto the stage. Good evening, everyone, she began, her voice amplified through the hall. Tonight we have a special highlight. Our guest of honor, the primary investor we are all here to impress, the mysterious Mr. K, has expressed great appreciation for one project in particular. A wave of excited murmuring swept the room. Julian puffed out his chest, squeezing Celeste's shoulder. Dr. Evans continued. Mr. K was captivated by the vision and depth of Miss Celeste Stone's project, the Codex. The room erupted in applause. Flashbulbs exploded as every camera turned to Celeste. Her smile was flawless, her nod gracious. Julian was beaming with pride and self-satisfaction. He was her biggest backer, the one who had put her on this stage. He leaned toward me, his voice a low, gloating whisper meant only for my ears. Now do you see? Her talent is my greatest trump card. Then he did something astonishingly crass. He pulled a folded document from his inside pocket and tossed it at me. The corner of the paper scraped across the back of my hand, leaving a stinging red mark. I looked down. It was a prepared statement, one supposedly written by me. It declared that I voluntarily withdrew from the engagement, admitted I was inferior in talent and grace to Celeste, and wished them a lifetime of happiness. Sign it, he hissed, staring at me like I was an ant he could squash at will. Don't force me to be ruthless. On stage, Dr. Evans cleared her throat and the room fell silent again. In addition, she said, her voice ringing with curiosity, Mr. K has one more unusual request. The room leaned in, captivated. Mr. K would like Miss Isabella Croft to join the pitch on stage as well. Julian's triumphant smile froze solid. The light in Celeste's eyes dimmed instantly, replaced by a flicker of panic. Dr. Evans paused for a moment, her expression unreadable. We've discovered, she continued, her words dropping like stones into the silent hall, that the project submitted by Miss Isabella Croft, Solaris, shares an identical core framework and financial forecast with Miss Stone's project, the Codex. The air was sucked out of the room. All eyes turned sharply to me. Julian's head whipped around, the fury of a man about to erupt flashing in his eyes. Celeste had begun to tremble uncontrollably. All the color had drained from her face, leaving her expertly applied makeup standing out in garish contrast. In the suffocating silence, I calmly placed my champagne flute on a nearby table. I straightened the collar of my gown, my movements slow and deliberate. Then I walked past Julian and Celeste without granting them a single glance. My heels clicked decisively on the polished marble floor as I stepped onto the stage. The spotlight immediately found me, blindingly bright. Behind me, the giant screen flickered to life, displaying the two project proposals side by side. The Codex on the left, Solaris on the right. The structure was exactly the same. The financial forecasts were identical. Celeste was the first to react. Her acting skills kicked in. Her eyes filled with manufactured tears and her voice trembled with a convincing blend of hurt and shock. Isabella, she gasped, addressing me as if I'd just stabbed her in the heart. I know you've never really liked me, but why? Why would you steal the work I poured my heart and soul into? In one short, masterful sentence, she had painted me as the jealous, despicable fraud. Julian sprang into action, playing the role of the outraged protector. He pulled her tightly into his arms and pointed a shaking finger at me, shouting to the entire room. She stole it. I saw her with my own eyes 3 days ago, sneaking into Celeste's room like a thief. She must have taken the files then. He glared at me, his eyes burning with pure hatred. Isabella, I know you too well. All you ever had were cheap tricks. You don't understand the first thing about real business strategy. You're not even qualified to be Celeste's assistant. Below the stage, I saw my father, his face purple with rage, begin to stand ready to charge to my defense. I caught his eye and gave a subtle, almost imperceptible shake of my head. I raised my hand not toward him but toward Dr. Evans. My voice, amplified by the microphone, was preternaturally calm. Words alone prove nothing. Since Mr. K is following the summit, why don't we let him give us a live question? Pressure test. Then we'll see clearly who the real creator is and who's the thief. Without a moment's hesitation, arrogant to the last, Julian answered on Celeste's behalf. Fine. Let's settle this so you'll admit defeat once and for all. He was utterly convinced. In this second life, his judgment couldn't be wrong. He was about to turn this public humiliation into a shining testament for his so-called true love. The large screen behind us lit up with a video connection. A man appeared on the screen, his face obscured by a sleek silver mask that revealed only his intense, dark eyes. Mr. K. His voice when he spoke was modulated slightly, but carried a tone of sharp intelligence. He presented a complex, cutting-edge question about data scalability and ethical AI implementation. A question so forward-thinking it was barely on the industry's radar. Celeste turned ghostly pale. The question was well beyond the scope of anything she had memorized from my notes. She opened her mouth, her lips moving soundlessly for a moment before she stammered out a response. It was a chaotic mess of buzzwords, broken logic, and meaningless corporate jargon. In the end, all she could muster was a weak, empty conclusion. It's a bold concept, she stammered, but it needs time to be validated. Julian immediately jumped in to smooth things over. He shot me a smug look. Celeste is just nervous. But you, Isabella? He said mockingly. You're too scared to even say a word. You've already lost. Then turning to the screen, he put on the act of a devoted, humble partner. Mr. K, please, Celeste is just a pure, innocent girl. Her mind is all creativity and vision. Please don't make things harder for her. She never wanted her work to be plagiarized. I apologize on her behalf. He then made his fatal error. As long as you're still willing to invest, I promise to make Isabella disappear for good. He wanted to trade my erasure for Celeste's future. The whispers below the stage turned into open ridicule. So this was her plan? Force her way onto the stage? Shameless. Even Julian Vance wants her gone. Why is she still here? I smiled. I stepped forward and picked up a marker from beside the presentation whiteboard. The tip made a crisp, deliberate sound as it met the pristine surface. And then I began to speak. The sound of the marker was like a starter's pistol in the dead silence. Every eye in the grand hall was fixed on me, a mixture of scorn, curiosity, and schadenfreude. Julian's smirk was a permanent fixture, already tasting victory. Celeste's trembling had subsided into a pathetic, performative weeping that she hid against Julian's shoulder. I began to write, my movements swift and sure. I didn't just answer Mr. K's question. I dissected it. I broke it down across 3 dimensions. Core algorithmic logic, technical infrastructure baseline, and real-world ethical application. Layer by layer, I peeled it back, my voice clear and steady, devoid of nerves, filled only with a cold, certain authority. I proposed 3 concrete optimization solutions, each more elegant and innovative than the last, explaining not just the what, but the why. The underlying philosophy that separated a true creator from a mere memorizer. When I finished, I placed the marker down with a definitive click. The whiteboard was a tapestry of complex equations, flowcharts, and strategic notes. The room was utterly silent. The scorn had evaporated, replaced by a dawning, shocked comprehension. I turned to face the audience, my gaze sweeping over their stunned faces before landing on Julian and a now pale Celeste. One more thing I need to highlight, I said, my voice cutting through the silence. I pointed to the 2 identical proposals still glowing on the giant screen behind me. To fool amateur investors, I continued, my eyes locking on Julian, those who pretend to understand business architecture but don't, I intentionally planted 3 data traps in my original proposal. I watched the blood drain from Julian's face. Celeste looked utterly lost. She had no idea what I was talking about. I identified each trap, explaining its sophisticated purpose and its precise mechanical trigger. The first, I said, is a recursive loop in the user acquisition cost analysis, designed to artificially inflate projections. It's programmed to detonate in the second financial reporting cycle, making growth seem unsustainable. The second is a hidden latency issue in the core architecture, set to cripple platform performance exactly at the 500,000 user mark. The third. I detailed the third trap, a beautifully complex piece of strategic misdirection that would funnel capital into a black hole of useless features. A true thief, I said, my voice ringing clear in the hushed hall, would never see any of that. They would copy the beauty and paste the flaws. The room fell into a dead, profound silence. You could have heard a pin drop. Julian's face went from flushed red to a dark, humiliated shade of purple. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a dawning, horrifying realization. Celeste swayed on her feet, her performance forgotten, replaced by genuine, sheer terror. She looked like a puppet whose strings had been cut. On the large screen, Mr. K remained silent for a long, agonizing moment. The masked face was unreadable. Then his modulated voice finally spoke, addressed not to me but to Julian. Mr. Vance. Do you still believe Miss Isabella Croft is the plagiarist? Julian's face turned a shade of ash gray I had never seen before. It was the look of a man watching his entire reality, his second chance, shatter into a million pieces. He'd been stripped bare in front of the entire world he sought to rule. Every ounce of his dignity and confidence crumbled to dust. His body trembled, not with anger but with a primal, confusing fear. No, that's impossible, he muttered, the words a broken whisper. He turned toward the pale, speechless Celeste in his arms, his grip on her tightening from protective to accusatory. Celeste. Tell him. Tell everyone it's not true. It was you. You taught me all of this. Say it. Celeste's lips trembled. She tried to form words, to summon another tear, another lie, but nothing came out. Her pretense, her performance, was laughable in the face of undeniable expert strength. She was exposed. Then Mr. K's voice came through the screen again, cold and factual. Miss Stone, your submission for the Codex was timestamped 3 days ago at 9:15 a.m. A document receipt flashed on the screen beside his face. However, our system logs show that Miss Croft submitted Solaris 3 weeks ago at 3:02 p.m. The crowd erupted in a collective gasp. 3 weeks. It was irrefutable. That, Mr. K stated, the single word dripping with finality, would be more than enough time for someone with intent to make a perfect copy of an original project. The energy in the room inverted. Every whisper, every mocking glance that had been aimed at me now swept toward Julian and Celeste. It was a tidal wave of scorn. Julian's reaction was instantaneous and vicious. He shoved Celeste away from him as if she were something filthy, contaminated. She let out a sharp, genuine scream as she fell to the ground, her expensive gown pooling around her, her carefully constructed image completely disheveled. He didn't even look at her. His eyes, bloodshot and wild with a mixture of rage and utter humiliation, found me. He stormed toward the stage, but security subtly moved to block his path. He was like a caged animal. You, he hissed, his voice cracking with fury. You planned this. You knew from the start. You wanted to watch me fall. Isabella, you're so cruel. I looked down at his face, twisted with desperation. The man I had loved for a lifetime, the man who had watched me drown. There was no satisfaction, only a vast, empty calm. Julian, I said, my voice calm and clear over the din, I wasn't watching you fall. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. I was just taking back what was mine. At that moment the figure on the screen moved. Mr. K reached up and slowly, deliberately removed the silver mask. The entire venue gasped as one. A collective intake of breath. The face revealed was not that of a stranger. It was a man perhaps in his late 40s, with a gentle, refined handsomeness that was currently pale and bore the faint traces of illness. But his eyes were sharp, intelligent, and filled with an unspoken pain as they settled on me. The entire venue went silent once more. Even my father, seated below the stage, stood up in stunned disbelief, his mouth slightly agape. Julian was hit as if by thunder. He froze completely, the strength draining from his body. His Adam's apple bobbed as he forced out 2 words. a horrified whisper that was picked up by the stage microphones. Cashin. He should have said the true power behind Ethelred Capital. My uncle Cashin Vance. Due to a prolonged and secret battle with a chronic illness, Cashin had spent years receiving treatment overseas, a reclusive figure rarely seen in public. In my last life he had passed away quietly, and in sorting through his private effects, I had discovered a heartbreaking truth. He had always been my silent guardian. He had watched over me, believed in me, and from the shadows, using his immense power and influence, he had helped clear away countless obstacles for me. Obstacles that Julian had never even known existed. He had been the invisible hand that had often steadied Julian's shaky empire, all for my sake. Now his eyes, so like Julian's yet so profoundly different, were filled with a deep regret. Isabella, he said, his real voice softer than the modulated one but no less powerful. I'm sorry. Your uncle came back too late. The moment he spoke, the crowd erupted again, this time in a frenzy of reassessment. His niece. Cashin Vance's niece? The dynamic in the room shifted irrevocably. Then, addressing the stunned audience, he made his announcement. From today onward, Cashin declared, his voice gaining strength, Ethelred Capital will invest fully in Miss Isabella Croft's Solaris project. He paused, letting the weight of that statement sink in. It was a death sentence for any competing project, especially a stolen one. He wasn't finished. And, he continued, I will transfer 30% of my personal shares in Ethelred Capital unconditionally to my niece, Isabella. As his final words landed, the entire hall fell into an eerie, stunned silence. The scale of it was unimaginable. It wasn't just an investment. It was an anointing. It was a transfer of dynastic power. The light in Julian's eyes didn't just fade. It was extinguished. Only ashes remained. It was then that he finally understood the full, devastating scope of his failure. He had been given a second chance at life. And not only had he failed to right his wrongs, he had personally, publicly, and irrevocably ruined himself. He had bet on the wrong woman and insulted the right one in front of the one man who truly held all the power. The murmurs began again, now laced with a new kind of venom directed at him. What an idiot. He backed a fraud and ended up offending Cashin Vance's actual heir. He had the golden goose and he strangled it for a cut-rate copy. The summit ended not with a bang, but with a whirlwind of frantic social recalibration. I was immediately surrounded by a new crowd, their faces eager, their congratulations effusive. I accepted them with a distant smile, my mind already elsewhere. I avoided Julian's hollow, broken stare and ignored Celeste, who was being helped off the floor by a reluctant event coordinator, her face a mess of tears and smeared makeup. They were already ghost. My father found me, his eyes shining with tears of pride and fury. But I had no idea. I know, Dad, I said, squeezing his arm. It's okay. Uncle Cashin's assistant quietly guided us through a private exit. A sleek, black town car was waiting at the curb. Inside, seated in the dim light, was Cashin himself. He looked weary but offered me a small, sad smile. Get in, Isabella, he said, his voice warm. We have much to discuss. I sat in the plush leather seat beside him, my father taking the front passenger seat. The driver pulled away from the curb, leaving the glittering spectacle behind. I sat quietly, watching the neon lights of the city flash by outside the window. My father kept glancing back at me, his expression a complex mix of guilt, remorse, and overwhelming pride. Isabella, Uncle Cashin said after a few minutes of silence. He handed me a thick document folder. It was the official transfer agreement for 30% of Ethelred Capital's shares. I accepted it without a word. My fingers trembled slightly as I held the weight of it, the weight of a future I had never dreamed of. This is what you deserve, Uncle Cashin said, his pale face tinged with deep emotion. Back when your grandfather founded Ethelred with my father, your mother was the one he saw as his true successor. If it hadn't been for... He didn't finish the sentence, but I understood. If it hadn't been for her choosing family life, for the patriarchal structures that pushed her aside, for the illness that took her too young. In my previous life, I'd been so consumed by my devotion to Julian that I'd ignored everything about my mother's legacy and my grandfather's empire. I'd turned a blind eye to the family business, content to be the power behind a lesser throne. Not until Cashin passed away and Ethelred was gutted from within by Julian's incompetence and Celeste's greed did I realize my error. But by then it was far too late. Thank you, Uncle, I said, my voice thick with a sincerity I hadn't felt in years. From now on, I'll be the one to protect what you and Grandpa built. He looked momentarily stunned, then a smile of deep relief spread across his features. It was the answer he'd always wanted to hear. The car eventually stopped in front of the Stone family villa. But my moment of peace was short-lived. As we walked through the front door, the sound of raised voices hit us. The drama was not over. Inside, my Aunt Sharon and Uncle Robert, Celeste's parents, were already waiting, their faces contorted in outrage. They leapt to their feet the moment we entered. Alistair. Aunt Sharon wailed, tears and smeared mascara streaming down her face. You have to stand up for our Celeste. She was framed. That little viper set her up. She jabbed a finger toward me. Our Celeste is pure. There's no way she would ever plagiarize anything. Uncle Robert quickly added his voice, his face red with fury. It was her. Isabella. That girl's been cunning and jealous since she was little. She must have been jealous of Celeste and Julian's love. That's why she set up this whole trap. My father trembled with a fresh wave of rage, pointing at the two of them. You actually have the nerve to come into my home and say this? After what your daughter did? Instead of repenting, you dare twist the truth like this. I thought my aunt might finally back down under his fury, but to my surprise she turned her venom directly on me, her eyes blazing with a hatred I never knew she possessed. Isabella, don't think you're untouchable just because your uncle supports you now, she shrieked. Don't forget why Julian Vance liked you in the first place. If it weren't for our Celeste constantly praising you in front of him, copying how you dressed and spoke just to get his attention, do you really think he would have looked at you twice? You're nothing but a cold, boring wooden doll. Celeste made you interesting. So that was their twisted truth. My so-called 23 years of love had been nothing but a carefully crafted illusion built by their manipulation. Julian hadn't fallen for me. He'd fallen for a reflection of me, curated and performed by my cousin. I smiled, a cold, terrifying smile that made her flinch. So, I said, stepping closer, my voice like ice. You admit it. You admit Celeste has been copying my life from the very beginning. My aunt recoiled but doubled down. Copying? That's called helping. If it weren't for Celeste with your personality, you'd never have gotten married. You should be thanking her. Enough, my father roared, his voice shaking the crystals in the chandelier. He slammed a stack of documents onto the coffee table. This is a termination of familial ties agreement I had my lawyer draft an hour ago. From this moment on, your family has nothing to do with the Crofts. Get out. Now. My aunt and uncle were stunned into silence. They hadn't expected this. They'd expected to bully and guilt their way back into favor. Alistair, you can't do this, my uncle spluttered. Big brother, please, my aunt cried, lunging toward him. He shoved her away with a force I didn't know he had. Security. 2 guards entered immediately and began dragging my sputtering, shrieking aunt and uncle toward the door. You can't treat us like this. Isabella. You destroyed my daughter's future. My aunt screamed as she was hauled out. I watched them go with cold eyes. There was no satisfaction, only a deep, frozen calm. Celeste is still upstairs, I said, my voice even. Celeste. You can come down now. She appeared at the top of the stairs, her face pale as ash. She hadn't dared show herself during the entire confrontation. Now discovered she had no choice but to walk down each step trembling. She stopped in front of me, her eyes filled with real tears now, tears of fear. Isabella. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. Looking at her, disgust rose in my chest. In my previous life, this was exactly how she had ruined me. Step by step, she had taken everything from me. My husband, my child, my identity, my life. I didn't say a word. I simply waved my hand. The security guards understood. They took her by the arms and escorted her out of the house, out of our lives. Finally, the villa fell silent. But I knew it wasn't over. Julian Vance, stripped of his illusions and his future, was like a wounded, cornered animal. And wounded animals are the most dangerous of all. The silence in the Croft villa after my aunt, uncle and cousin were ejected was profound. It wasn't a peaceful quiet. It was the heavy, echoing stillness after a bomb has detonated. The elegant furniture, the family portraits, the very air, everything felt charged with the aftermath of betrayal and expulsion. My father sank into his worn leather armchair by the fireplace, looking every one of his 65 years and then some. The fury that had sustained him was gone, replaced by a deep, weary grief. My own brother, he murmured, staring into the cold ashes. His wife, my niece. How did it come to this, Bella? I didn't have an answer that would comfort him. The truth, that greed and envy had festered for decades under our roof, was too cruel to voice. Instead, I went to the kitchen, brewed a pot of his favorite Earl Grey and brought it to him. The familiar, comforting ritual seemed to ground him. Uncle Cashin observed it all from the doorway, his expression unreadable but his eyes missing nothing. The ride home had been brief, our conversation minimal. The weight of the share transfer documents in my bag felt like a lodestone, pulling me toward a future I was only beginning to comprehend. Alistair, Cashin said softly, moving to sit opposite my father. Some branches of a family tree are rotten. To save the tree you must prune them. It's a painful necessity. My father nodded slowly, accepting the cup I handed him. I know, Cashin. It's just the waste of it all. It's not a waste, I said, my voice firm. It's a reclaiming. The next few days were a whirlwind of controlled chaos. I moved out of my childhood bedroom and into the corporate suite at the top of the Croft Industries headquarters. It had been my mother's office, preserved by my father as a shrine. Now it became my war room. The first thing I did was have her large antique mahogany desk cleaned and polished. I sat in her chair, feeling the weight of her legacy, and got to work. Uncle Cashin was my guide, a patient and shrewd mentor. My knowledge from my past life was intuitive, based on lived experience. He taught me the structure, the paperwork, the legal and financial frameworks that turned instinct into strategy. We spent hours each day poring over Ethelred Capital's portfolios, and simultaneously, we began the deep forensic audit of Croft Industries. I knew where the bodies were buried because I'd watched Julian and Celeste bury them in another life. Now I was the one digging them up. It was during one of these sessions, overlooking the city skyline from my floor-to-ceiling windows, that I saw it. A massive, towering digital advertisement on the building opposite. It was for a new venture capital firm, Blaze Ventures. And the face smiling arrogantly next to the logo was one I knew well, though not from any friendly encounter. Liam. In my first life, Liam had been a fierce, brilliant rival of Julian's. Julian, with my unseen help, had crushed him, absorbing his company in a hostile takeover that was celebrated in the business pages as a masterstroke. I remembered the photo of Liam from the court steps, his face a mask of cold, furious defeat. He had sworn vengeance on Julian that day, a vow everyone had dismissed as the sour grapes of a loser. Now here he was back and seemingly flush with cash. Uncle Cashin followed my gaze. Liam Chin, he said, a note of interest in his voice. He's taken over Julian's abandoned Skynet project. Ironic, isn't it? A sworn enemy turned unlikely ally. Is he an ally? I asked, my eyes still fixed on Liam's confident smirk. To us, perhaps not. But to anyone against Julian Vance he is a weapon. And Julian, in his desperation, is making it easy for him. Cashin handed me a tablet displaying a confidential contract. Liam's firm, Blaze Ventures, has just invested heavily in Julian's new company. But the terms, they're suicidal. I scanned the document. It was a bet the company agreement. Julian had to reach 1 million users for his Skynet platform within 3 months. If he failed, Blaze Ventures would gain full control of his company's shares and assets. It was a Hail Mary pass from a man who believed his own delusions of grandeur. Has he lost his mind? My father asked, joining us at the window after reading the terms over my shoulder. I shook my head, a cold smile touching my lips. He's not crazy, Dad. Just too confident. Confident to the point of blindness. Confident to the point of stupidity. He truly believed that any idea he touched would turn to gold, forgetting that it was my Midas touch he'd been relying on all along. The next day, Julian publicly announced the launch of Skynet. He held a lavish press conference, and despite his recent humiliation, a cadre of loyalists and sensation-seeking media still showed up. He stood tall, radiating a brittle pride, his eyes constantly scanning the crowd. I knew who he was looking for. Me. My father and I watched it live on the news feed in my office. This project, my father said, frowning deeply at the screen as Julian spouted buzzwords about disrupting social connectivity. It looks strangely familiar. I let out a cold, humorless laugh. Shit. It's the draft I once tossed into the trash bin in university. The concept had 3 fundamental fatal flaws I had identified years ago. I had abandoned it. But somehow, in her desperate scrambling, Celeste had dug it up from my old computer files and presented it to Julian as a groundbreaking treasure. And he, in his newfound contempt for me, had swallowed it whole. Should we stop him? Uncle Cashin asked, his tone neutral. A word in the right ear could pull the funding. It would be a mercy, really. No, I said, my voice firm. Let him carry on. I walked to my safe, unlocked it, and pulled out a familiar old binder. I tossed it onto the desk. This is Skynet's original data model. The one I wrote. Once the user count surpasses 500,000, the system will crash. The architecture can't handle the load. It's fundamentally flawed. I paused, letting that sink in. Then I delivered the coup de grace. And when I first designed it, even as a student, I was paranoid about intellectual property theft. I left a backdoor in the architecture. A hidden data sync protocol. I met their stunned gazes. Every piece of user data Skynet acquires will auto-sync to a secure server I control. My father stared at me, a complex emotion crossing his face. Pride, shock, and a flicker of fear. Isabella. To deal with wolves, you have to be even more ruthless than they are. I nodded calmly. I know, Dad. I learned from the best. In the following days, I threw myself into the Solaris project with relentless focus, all while keeping a close, silent watch on Skynet's meteoric and entirely artificial trajectory. Julian was burning through his remaining capital like water. Ads for Skynet flooded every major platform, subway station, and television channel. The hype was deafening. The user numbers predictably soared. Day 3, 400,000 users. Day 5, 450,000. Day 7, 480,000. My team, a small, fiercely loyal group of engineers and analysts I'd poached from under Julian's nose, worked around the clock in a secure lab. They were preparing for the harvest. We watched the numbers climb with the grim anticipation of engineers watching a faulty reactor core approach meltdown. On the night of Day 8, the digital counter on Skynet's public dashboard hit 499,999. To celebrate the imminent milestone, Julian held a lavish, obscenely expensive celebration banquet at the opulent Grand Regency Hotel. The event was filled with the usual sycophants, celebrities, and business elites who always flocked to the newest, shiniest thing. He stood on a stage draped in Blaze Ventures' crimson logo, champagne flute in hand, beaming with manufactured triumph. "Thank you all for your support," he announced, his voice echoing through the ballroom. "Tonight, as we stand on the brink of unprecedented success, I want to thank someone very special." The crowd stirred. Every eye turned toward the entrance. I had arrived, fashionably late, with my father as my escort. We stood quietly at the back, arms crossed, observing the spectacle. "Without her," Julian continued, lifting his glass in a mocking toast directly toward me, his eyes gleaming with vicious triumph, "I wouldn't have found my true self. I wouldn't have the drive to prove everyone wrong. Isabella," he called out, his voice dripping with sarcastic gratitude. "Do you see? I soar even higher without you." The crowd, unsure how to react, offered a smattering of nervous applause. Clutching his arm, looking visibly worn and thin but with eyes shining with desperate pride, was Celeste. She was back by his side, having apparently been forgiven her public disgrace. Their shared humiliation had only bonded them tighter in their delusion. I simply raised my own glass of sparkling water with a calm, enigmatic smile. Inside, I was silently counting down. 3, 2, 1. The number on the giant digital screen behind Julian changed. For 99,998. For 99,999. 500,000. A cheer started to rise from the crowd. It died in their throats. At the exact moment the counter ticked over to 500,000, a singular notification sound rang out. Then another. And another. Every phone in the room buzzed and chirped in a chaotic symphony. The Skynet app on every single device instantly blacked out. Force closed. The large screen behind Julian went dark, then flashed with a brutal error message. System failure. Connection lost. Panicked murmurs turned into shouts. People tapped frantically at their screens. Nothing. Then the screen behind Julian flickered again. Abruptly, it switched to a serene, sun-drenched logo. A golden sun rising over a circuit board. The logo of Solaris Technologies. A message popped up, clear and elegant. "Skynet has collapsed. Your community doesn't have to. Solaris is now officially live. All Skynet users can migrate their profiles and data with one click. Seamless. Secure. Preserved." The room erupted into pure chaos. Journalists scrambled for a signal, investors roared in anger, socialites gasped in delight at the drama. Julian stood frozen on stage, his face a grotesque mask of disbelief. The reality of his failure, so public, so absolute, crashed down on him. He screamed a raw animal sound of rage and slammed his champagne flute to the floor. Shards flew in all directions. "Isabella!" he roared, his voice breaking. He charged off the stage through the crowd toward me, his eyes wild with murderous intent. Security guards materialized, blocking his path, holding back the thrashing, furious animal he had become. "What did you do?" he screamed, spittle flying from his lips. "You witch! What did you do?" I stood up, perfectly calm. I smoothed my gown and walked calmly through the parted crowd toward the center of the stage. I took the microphone from its stand. The room fell silent again, everyone leaning in to hear. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice clear, calm, and unwavering, amplified through the ballroom. "My apologies for the interruption to your evening. I'm Isabella Croft, CEO of Solaris Technologies." I allowed a small, polite smile. "I'd like to thank Mr. Vance for providing such an effective and extensive early-stage marketing campaign for our new platform." A wave of nervous laughter swept the room. Julian had stopped struggling, simply staring at me in hollow-eyed shock. "Just now," I continued, my gaze sweeping the audience before landing squarely on his broken form, "Mr. Vance said that without me he would soar even higher." I tilted my head slightly, my smile turning icy. "But he forgot one thing." I paused, letting the silence build. "A person without wings," I said, my voice dropping to a deadly quiet murmur that everyone strained to hear, "will never fly." The collapse of the Skynet project triggered a chain reaction faster than even I had anticipated. Liam Chin at Blaze Ventures, smelling blood in the water, moved with brutal efficiency. He immediately activated the bet-on clause, publicly demanding Julian repay 3 times the initial investment amount, a sum I knew was mathematically impossible for Julian to lay his hands on. Otherwise, Blaze would forcibly acquire his company's carcass. The news channels flashed with the story. The once celebrated rising star underdog Julian Vance was now neck-deep in a very public financial crisis. Blaze Ventures officially announced they would pursue all available legal avenues. Multiple properties under Julian's name were frozen by the courts. I sat in my office, the city lights twinkling below, watching the financial news notifications flash across my screen. A faint, cold smile played on my lips. It was a satisfying sight, but it was only the beginning. This was just the mopping up of a minor nuisance. Julian was a symptom, not the disease. The disease was the entire Vance empire, and I was just preparing the antibiotic. "Miss Croft," my assistant's voice came hesitantly over the intercom. "He's here again. It's his 7th visit today." "Julian." "Of course. Tell him I'm not available," I said calmly, not looking up from the merger and acquisition report I was reading. To me now, the man I had once been obsessed with for over 20 years was no more than a stranger passing by. A noisy, irritating stranger. Suddenly, a commotion erupted from the plaza below my window. I heard shouting. I walked to the window and looked down. There he was. Julian Vance, standing in the middle of the square in front of Croft Industries, disheveled and red-eyed. His suit was wrinkled, his hair unkempt. "Isabella," he bellowed, his voice echoing off the glass and steel towers. "I know you're in there. Come out here. You can't do this to me." Security guards approached him, but he fought them off like a madman, shoving and yelling. "We were husband and wife. 23 years. 23 years. I watched, utterly indifferent, my heart as calm as still water. In my previous life I had given him everything I had, my love, my intellect, my life, only to be repaid with betrayal and a cold, watching eye as I drowned. This life I wouldn't give him a single second more of myself. I pressed the intercom. "Escort him off the premises. If he resists, call the police and have him charged with trespassing." I watched as security finally overpowered him, grabbing him by both arms. Still unwilling to give up, he shouted one last thing, his voice cracking with a desperation that once would have shattered me. "Isabella, what do you want from me? Just meet me once. Please." I didn't move from the window. My gaze was steady, devoid of any emotion. When he realized I wouldn't come out, wouldn't even acknowledge his performance, his shoulders slumped. As the guards dragged him away, he pulled out his phone with a fumbling hand. A moment later, my personal phone buzzed on my desk. A text message. After everything we've been through, are you really this heartless? Please, I'm begging you. Help me one last time. If you get me through this, I'll agree to anything you want. I read the message. Then, without a second thought, I blocked his number. Once I thought he was my whole world. Now he wasn't even worthy of a glance. The intercom buzzed again. Miss Croft. Yes. Chairman Alistair Croft asked me to remind you of your lunch with Mr. Chin from Blaze Ventures in 1 hour. And, my assistant's voice held a new note of gravity. A separate message just came through. Chairman Gordon Vance of the Vance Group would like to request a meeting with you at your earliest convenience. I smiled. The first fish had taken the bait. Now a much bigger, older shark was circling. It was time to go fishing. Lunch with Liam Chin was a fascinating exercise in mutually assured cynicism. We met at a discreet high-end sushi bar where the tables were separated by opaque silk screens, ensuring privacy. He was already there when I arrived, looking nothing like the defeated man from the courthouse steps. He was sharp, composed, and his eyes held a calculating light that acknowledged the game we were both playing. Miss Croft, he said, rising slightly in a gesture of old-world courtesy. A pleasure. Though I suspect our motivations for this meeting are transactional. Mr. Chin, I replied, taking my seat. I've always appreciated directness. And yes, transactions are the foundation of business. The key is ensuring you're on the right side of them. We spoke in circles for a while, discussing market trends, the failed Skynet launch, a topic that brought a grim smile to his face, and the potential of Solaris. He was probing, trying to gauge my depth, my ambition, and my feelings toward Julian. He signed a suicidal contract, Liam said finally, sipping his green tea. A bet a desperate man makes when he believes his own legend. I will own what's left of his company by the end of the week. He paused, watching me. I imagine that brings you some satisfaction. Satisfaction is a fleeting emotion, Mr. Chin, I said, selecting a piece of sashimi with my chopsticks. I'm more interested in stability. And Julian Vance is a destabilizing element. His continued presence, even in failure, is messy. Liam's eyes narrowed slightly. He understood. I wasn't here for gloating or an alliance. I was here to ensure the destabilizing element was permanently removed. I was giving him silent permission to be merciless, and in return he would face no interference from me, the one person with the power and now the motive to potentially salvage Julian's wreckage. Mess can be cleaned up, he said softly. With the right tools. I'm glad we understand each other, I said, offering him a small, cold smile. The transaction was complete. An hour later, I was walking into the exclusive members-only tea house where Gordon Vance had requested to meet. The air was thick with the scent of aged puer and quiet power. Gordon, Julian's father and the reigning patriarch of the Vance Empire, sat in the seat of honor in a private room, presiding over a traditional tea ceremony with the practiced ease of a man who had spent a lifetime mastering rituals of control. He didn't stand when I entered. He merely finished pouring a cup of steaming amber liquid and gestured for me to sit opposite him. Isabella, he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. He cut to the chase with the efficiency of a guillotine. I won't insult your intelligence by pretending this is a social call. I know that my idiot son wronged you. Profoundly. And I know that everything you've done these past few weeks has been aimed squarely at him. I sat back straight and accepted the teacup. I said nothing, simply waited for him to continue. He was testing the waters, trying to frame this as a shared problem we could solve together. I'll give you the chance to destroy him, Gordon said, leaning forward, his voice lowered to a conspiratorial whisper. I'll help you. I'll help you take down his company, see him ruined, ensure he's kicked out of the Vance family for good. He's an embarrassment. A liability. He waved a dismissive hand. In return, you'll merge your Solaris platform with the Vance Group. A partnership. You get your vengeance and a seat at a very powerful table. He thought I was a woman blinded by hatred, motivated solely by a spurned lover's revenge. He believed I would be so eager to see Julian crushed that I'd gladly hand over my birthright to the very dynasty that had created him. He was offering me a gilded cage, just a different one. I took a slow sip of the tea. It was bitter and complex. I placed the cup down with a quiet click that sounded unnaturally loud in the silent room. Chairman Vance, I said, looking up and meeting his cold, shrewd eyes. It seems you're mistaken about one thing. His eyebrow twitched almost imperceptibly. Oh. I'm not here to destroy him. I let the words hang in the air for a moment, watching his confusion grow. I'm here to devour him. I leaned forward slightly, my voice dropping to match his, but devoid of any conspiratorial warmth. It was flat, cold, factual. Not just his company, but the Vance Group as well. Gordon's hand trembled. The teacup he was holding clattered against the saucer, nearly spilling the expensive tea. His pupils constricted, his face turning a ghostly pale beneath his tan. For the first time I saw a crack in the formidable facade. "What did you say?" he whispered, the words barely audible. In response, I opened my leather portfolio and slid a single file folder across the polished lacquer table toward him. I didn't say a word. Hesitantly, his eyes never leaving mine, he opened the folder. Inside were detailed records, printouts, spreadsheets, and copies of bank transfers. 3 years of financial irregularities within the Vance Group. Backdoor dealings among his most trusted executives. Evidence of illicit offshore operations between him and several compliant board members. It was a roadmap of corruption, and every path led back to him. "Chairman Vance," I said quietly as he stared at the damning evidence. "You're getting older." I let the implied weakness of age hang in the air. "Maybe it's time you retired. Enjoy your remaining years. Travel. Spend time with your other son." The mention of Gavin, his legitimate heir from his first marriage, the son he considered weak and too soft for business, was a deliberate needle. Gordon's face went from pale to red, finally swelling into an ugly, bruised shade of purple. He slammed his hand on the table, sending tea splashing everywhere. A few hot drops landed on the sleeve of my white blouse. I didn't bother to wipe them off. I let the stains spread. "You dare threaten me?" he hissed, his composure shattered. "This isn't a threat," I replied, leaning forward slightly, my voice dangerously calm. "It's a negotiation. You have 2 choices." I held up one finger. "First, you call an emergency board meeting next week. You announce your voluntary retirement due to health reasons. You transfer all your controlling shares to me. In return, everything in this folder," I tapped it with a manicured nail, "stays locked away in a vault. Your family name keeps the last shred of dignity it has left." I paused, letting the offer sink into his rage. Then I held up a second finger, my eyes turning to ice. "Second, I go public with all of this tomorrow morning. The Vance Group, your leaky, battered ship, sinks straight to the bottom of the ocean. Do you really think all the shareholders you've cheated and all the rivals you've crushed and offended over the years will let you and your precious son Gavin off the hook? He'll be torn apart. Your legacy will be a footnote of scandal." Gordon Vance stared at me, a vein pulsing violently at his temple. He had never, in all his years of cutthroat business, imagined that the once docile, quiet girl who'd sat politely at family dinners could have investigated his empire so thoroughly. He didn't know that in my past life, in my desperate attempt to help Julian win his father's approval, I had studied the Vance Group inside and out. I knew every department, every hidden ledger, every executive's weakness. I knew their dirty accounts, their vulnerabilities, their sins. What I had once gathered as weapons for Julian to use, I was now turning against the heart of the beast itself. After a long, suffocating silence, Gordon slumped back in his chair. The fight drained out of him, leaving behind a tired old man. His voice was hoarse, defeated. I need time to think." "I'll give you 24 hours, I said, standing up and gathering my things. "I expect your signed agreement delivered to my office by 10 a.m. tomorrow. Don't be late." I turned and walked out, leaving him sitting amidst the ruins of his own arrogance. The sunlight outside was sharp and clarifying. Uncle Cashin was waiting in the car, idling at the curb. He rolled down the window, his face etched with concern. "Emily?" he asked, using the family name he preferred. "Gordon Vance is an old lion. He's dangerous. Isn't pushing him this hard too risky?" I got into the car, the adrenaline finally starting to recede, leaving a cold certainty in its wake. "Uncle, people like him," I said, accepting the bottle of water he offered. "You can't give them a second to regroup. What he fears most isn't losing the company. It's that his carefully groomed, legitimate heir, Gavin, will be destroyed in the fallout. He'll choose to sacrifice himself to save his version of the dynasty." Cashin looked at me, a new respect in his eyes. "You play a brutal game, niece." "I learned the rules from the best players in the city," I replied, looking out at the passing skyline. "I just decided to stop losing." Sure enough, the next morning at 9:58 a.m., a courier arrived at my office. The envelope contained no letter, no plea, no threat. Just the signed agreement. Gordon Vance had capitulated. He would resign. The shares would be mine. At that very moment, Julian was still completely in the dark, scrambling through the wreckage of his own life. He had pulled every string he could and finally, desperately, learned from my father's sympathetic but tight-lipped butler that I would be visiting my mother's grave that afternoon. It was drizzling softly in the cemetery, a fine misty rain that coated everything in a sheen of silver. I stood before the elegant marble headstone, the bouquet of white chrysanthemums in my hands seeming brighter against the gray day. "Hi, Mom," I whispered, arranging the flowers. "I came to see you. Don't worry. Your daughter is doing just fine now. No one will hurt me again. I promise." I heard the footsteps behind me on the wet gravel path. I didn't need to turn. I knew the sound of his walk, the weight of his presence even now. Julian stood a few feet away, holding a black umbrella. He looked like a ghost. The proud, arrogant man was gone, replaced by a gaunt, hollowed-out shell. The rain had plastered his hair to his forehead and soaked the shoulders of his cheap suit, a suit he doubtless had to buy off the rack now that his accounts were frozen. He just stood there silently watching me, his eyes red-rimmed and desperate. "Isabella," he called out, his voice hoarse and trembling. I ignored him, continuing to gently wipe the rain from my mother's photograph with my handkerchief. In the picture she smiled her gentle, knowing smile. He took a hesitant step forward, stopping at the spot where he used to place flowers during our yearly visits. His voice cracked. "I know I was wrong. I didn't look at him. I shouldn't have believed Celeste's lies. I shouldn't have treated you that way." He took a ragged breath. "I thought coming back to life was a gift. Second chance to fix everything. But now I realize, the biggest mistake I ever made was losing you." As he spoke, his eyes welled up, mixing with the rain on his face. "When you exposed those data traps at the summit, that's when I should have known. But I couldn't accept it. I didn't want to admit I was wrong. I didn't want to admit that I got a second life and still ended up a complete fool." He was crying now, tears streaming down his cheeks openly. "After Skynet collapsed, I locked myself in my office for 3 days and 3 nights. I replayed every moment of our past. And that's when I saw it. Every decision I once thought was mine, every success I claimed, you were always there. Behind the scenes. Without you, I was nothing. I am nothing." The raw confession hung in the damp air. He had finally dropped every last shred of pride and illusion. In front of me he had nothing left but the ugly, pathetic truth. "Isabella," he pleaded, his voice breaking. "Help me one more time. Just once more. For the sake of the 23 years we shared. If you help me, I'll cut all ties with Celeste immediately. I'll give up everything. I just want you back." His knees buckled. He fell to the muddy ground in front of my mother's grave, splashing dirty water onto the stone. "Isabella, I beg you. If not for me, then for our son. For Leo. He wasn't even born yet and you still had the nerve to bring him up? The same son who, when I was drowning, urged you to marry Celeste faster?" A cold fury, colder than the grave we stood beside, settled in my bones. I turned around slowly and looked down at him, sprawled in the mud. "Julian," I said, my voice low and steady. "Do you know what I was thinking about when I was drowning in my last life?" He looked up, his eyes wide, pleading. "It wasn't the 23 years we spent together. It wasn't love. I was thinking about the path I carved out for you with my blood, sweat, and everything I had. A golden path. And in the end, you and Celeste pissed on it like a pair of stray dogs." I took a step closer. I died with my eyes wide open. His body froze completely. He stared at me in utter, horrified disbelief. The plea died on his lips. I smiled then, a terrible cold smile. "So tell me, how could I possibly help you again?" I leaned in slightly. "The only thing I'll do is take back what's mine. Personally. Including everything you thought was yours. And for that," I added, the smirk returning, "I have to thank your father for his cooperation." Julian looked like he'd been struck by lightning. What did you say?" I said, I continued, my voice calm and merciless. "While you were too busy growling at my feet, your father was signing over all his shares in the Vance Group to me. This morning." His pupils dilated with shock. I wasn't done. "Oh, and Liam Chin from Blaze Ventures?" I delivered the final blow. "He sold me all the debt he held in your company. So Mr. Vance, legally speaking," I let the title hang in the air, laced with irony, "I'm your new boss. All the color drained from his face. His lips trembled but no sound came out. The flicker of hope and regret in his eyes crumbled into utter, lifeless despair. The scale of his loss was finally, fully comprehended. He had lost everything to the woman he'd betrayed, and his own father had handed her the keys. I pulled a document from inside my coat and threw it at his chest. It hit him and fell into the mud. Here's your termination notice. Out of respect for the decent material life you once provided me over those 23 years, I'll give you a severance package. A small one. My voice was like steel. Take it and get the hell out of the elite circle. Don't ever show up in front of me again. The paper began to soak up the muddy water, the ink blurring into illegibility. Julian raised his head. Rain and tears and mud mixed together on his face in a pitiful mess. He looked at me, his lips forming the same broken question over and over. Why? Why did it end like this? Why? Because you never loved me, I said flatly. You loved the idea of me you built in your head. Because you never recognized my value. You brought this on yourself. I looked at him, completely broken in the mud, and felt nothing. No anger, no pity, no sorrow. He was already a relic of a past life. I opened my umbrella and turned to walk toward the cemetery exit. After a few steps I paused. I didn't look back. My voice was quiet, detached, and final. Oh, and one more thing I forgot to mention. I let the silence stretch. The person you hate most, your brother, Gavin Vance, is now my deputy CEO. The Vance Group will be co-managed by the two of us going forward. I could feel his shock like a physical force hitting my back. You're the one who threw everything away, Julian. Not me. I didn't wait for a response. I walked on. Behind me, I heard a raw, anguish scream tear through the damp air, a sound of utter desolation. But the wind carried it away and it never reached me. The scream faded behind me, swallowed by the mist and the rows of silent headstones. It was the sound of a chapter closing definitively and forever. I didn't look back. The man weeping in the mud was no longer my husband, my tormentor, or even my problem. He was a ghost, and I had stopped believing in ghosts. The drive back to the city was silent. Uncle Cashin, who had been waiting discreetly at the cemetery gates, didn't press me for details. He simply handed me a thermos of hot tea. The warmth seeped into my hands, a small anchor in the surreal calm that had settled over me. Gavin Vance is waiting in your office, Cashin said quietly as the city skyline emerged through the rain. He arrived 10 minutes ago. He seems nervous. Good, I replied, my voice even. He should be. Gavin Vance was the opposite of Julian in almost every way. Where Julian was all sharp angles, bravado, and bastard-born ambition, Gavin was softer, more thoughtful, the legitimate heir who had always been overshadowed by his brother's vicious drive and his father's brutal expectations. I'd met him a handful of times at family functions. A quiet man with kind eyes who preferred his library to the boardroom. Gordon had considered him a weak disappointment. I saw him as an untapped resource. I walked into my office, shedding my wet coat. Gavin was standing by the window, looking out at the rain-swept plaza below. He turned as I entered, and I was struck by the profound anxiety in his eyes. He was a man who knew his world had been overturned and was terrified of what came next. Miss Croft, he said, his voice slightly unsteady. Isabella. I don't quite know what to say. My father's instructions were abrupt. Please sit, Gavin, I said, moving behind my desk. Your father's instructions were the result of a negotiation. One he lost. You're not your father. And this, I gestured around the office to the building to the city beyond, does not have to be a punishment. He sat gingerly on the edge of the chair, looking like a man awaiting a verdict. He said he was retiring for health reasons and that you were taking over. He said I was to assist you. He didn't provide details. Then I will, I said, folding my hands on the desk. Your father was facing financial and legal ruin. I provided him with a graceful exit. In return, I now control 51% of the Vance Group. You retain your 10%. The remaining 39% are with various shareholders who, I assure you, will be much happier with me at the helm than with your father facing indictment. He paled. Indictment. I have enough evidence to send him away for a long time, Gavin. The choice was simple. A quiet retirement or a very public destruction. He chose wisely. I leaned forward. But I didn't do this just to save your father from himself. I did it because the Vance Group is a sprawling, inefficient, and ethically compromised mess. It has immense potential that your father and brother were too short-sighted and greedy to realize. I slid a tablet across the desk to him. On it was a streamlined, aggressive plan for the Vance Group. It involved divesting from its shady offshore holdings, pouring resources into its legitimate tech and manufacturing arms, and merging its infrastructure with the rising star of Solaris. I need a deputy CEO who knows the company's history but isn't poisoned by its culture, I said. Someone the old guard board members might actually listen to. Someone who isn't me. I met his gaze. I believe that person is you. He stared at the tablet, his eyes scanning the plans. I saw the fear in them slowly being replaced by something else. Dawning comprehension and then a flicker of excitement. This is brilliant, he murmured, scrolling through the proposals. The synergies with Solaris alone, we've been trying to break into that market for years with brute force. This is elegant. He looked up at me, a new respect in his eyes. You did this. Not Julian. Everything Julian ever had I gave him, I said flatly. He was just the public face. The pretty logo on a product I built. Now I'm taking my product back. Gavin was silent for a long moment, absorbing the magnitude of what I was saying, of what Julian had truly lost. He never saw it, he said finally, almost to himself. He was so busy believing he was the genius he never saw the architect. He looked at me. What do you need from me? Loyalty, I said simply. Not to me personally. To the company. To this vision. I tapped the tablet. We have a lot of cleaning up to do. Your first task is to go through the executive roster. I want a list of every yes man, every crook your father installed. They're gone. Then, a list of the competent ones who were sidelined because they had a conscience. They're promoted. A slow smile spread across Gavin's face. The first genuine one I'd ever seen from him. Transformed him. They'll fight you. The old guard. Let them, I said with a cold smile of my own. I have their mortgages, their mistresses' apartments, and their secret bank accounts. They'll leave quietly. And so the unlikely alliance was forged. Gavin Vance, the gentle heir, and Isabella Croft, the architect of ruin, became the new leadership of the Vance Group. The business world watched, stunned, as we began our ruthless, methodical purge. Press releases announced a new strategic direction and a focus on innovation and ethical governance. The stock market, after an initial dip of confusion, began to climb. Stability, it seemed, was more attractive than Gordon's volatile corruption. My days became a whirlwind of strategy meetings, merger details, and managing the double life of running both the burgeoning Solaris and the retooling Vance Group. I was building an empire, brick by brick, on the ashes of the one I'd helped create and then destroy. Miss Croft, I'm sorry to interrupt. There's a situation. A commotion in the main lobby. It's Mr. Vance. Julian. He's trying to get upstairs. He's not in a good state. I sighed, the brief moment of warmth gone. The ghost was refusing to stay buried. Security. They're containing him, but he's being very vocal. Let him be vocal, I said coldly. Do not let him upstairs. If he becomes violent, call the police. I tried to refocus on the merger documents in front of me, but the distraction was there. Julian was a splinter, a constant, irritating presence even in his absence. The next day the splinter festered. News alerts began popping up on my phone. They were no longer about business. They were about scandal. From billions to beggar. The spectacular fall of Julian Vance. Exclusive. Inside Julian Vance's breakdown. Vance heir spotted sleeping on park bench? The articles were accompanied by grainy, long-lens photos. Julian, unshaven, sitting on a bench in a crumpled suit. Julian arguing with a hotel manager, presumably being ejected. Julian staring hollowly into a cheap cup of coffee at a diner. The media, having built him up, was now gleefully tearing him down. They were painting a picture of a man in total mental and financial collapse. And they were connecting it all to me. The narrative was subtle but clear. The cold, calculating ex-wife who took everything and left him destitute. I was being cast as the ice queen, the villainess of the piece. I knew with cold certainty who was feeding them this narrative. Celeste. It had her fingerprints all over it. She couldn't beat me in business, so she was trying to win the war of public opinion. She was making Julian her pathetic poster boy, her weapon of sympathy. It was a clever, vicious strategy. In the world of high finance, perception was everything. A reputation for ruthless coldness could be a strength. But a reputation for cruel, personal vindictiveness could make investors nervous. Partners could get skittish. I was watching the headlines pile up when Gavin Vance walked into my office, his face grim. He tossed a tabloid onto my desk. The headline was particularly brutal. He took her cousin, she took his life. The Isabella Croft story. This is getting out of hand, Gavin said, uncharacteristic anger in his voice. It's not just about him anymore. It's starting to splash onto the Vance Group. And onto Solaris. Board members are getting nervous calls. I know, I said, my voice calm though my mind was racing. We need to do something, he urged. A statement? A lawsuit. A statement gives it oxygen. A lawsuit takes years, I said, shaking my head. I looked out the window, my eyes narrowing. No. This requires a more surgical approach. I knew Celeste. I knew how she operated. She was hiding behind Julian's tragedy, pulling the strings from the shadows. To stop the narrative, I had to cut the strings. I had to remind her that I knew where all her bodies were buried too. And I knew exactly where to start digging. There was a name from my past life, a name I'd buried deep. A disgraced private investigator that Julian had used for his dirtiest jobs, a man named Silas Crow. Julian had thrown him to the wolves to save himself from a scandal years ago. Silas would be holding a grudge. And he would know things. Things about Celeste that even I didn't. It was time to stop playing defense. The ghost and his puppeteer needed to be laid to rest. For good. I picked up my private phone. It was time to make a call I thought I'd never make. Silas Crow operated out of a dingy office above a laundromat that perpetually smelled of cheap detergent and stale cigarette smoke. The man himself was a relic. A washed-up private investigator whose best years had been spent in the shadows of the elite, digging up dirt until he became dirt himself. Julian had used him for years, then discarded him without a second thought when a particularly sensitive operation nearly blew back on them. Silas had taken the fall and he'd been festering in this hole ever since. He didn't look surprised to see me. His small, watery eyes, set deep in a network of wrinkles, just blinked slowly as I stepped into his cluttered office. Isabella Croft, he rasped, not bothering to get up from his worn swivel chair. Or is it Vance again? Hard to keep track with the headlines these days. He gestured to a stack of tabloids on a nearby filing cabinet, all featuring my face. Seems you're the woman of the hour. I need information, Silas, I said, dispensing with pleasantries. I placed a thick envelope of cash on his desk. And discretion. He eyed the envelope but didn't touch it. Information on who? The ex-husband? I've been reading all about his misfortune. There was a gleam of schadenfreude in his eyes. Not him. Her. Celeste Stone. A slow, unpleasant smile spread across his face. Fazen. The other woman. I wondered when you'd get around to her. He finally picked up the envelope, thumbing through the bills. Julian had me look into her, you know. Years ago when he first got infatuated. Wanted to make sure his new toy was clean. He snorted. She wasn't. My heart beat a little faster. This was the gamble. What did you find? More than Julian wanted to know, Silas said, leaning back, the chair groaning in protest. He paid me a bonus to bury it deep. Said it complicated the narrative. He shook his head with a cynical laugh. The man loved a good story even if it was a lie. He opened a rusting filing cabinet, his movements slow and deliberate, and pulled out a thin, dusty folder. He blew on it, sending a cloud of dust motes dancing in the stale air. Celeste Stone, he began, opening the folder. Or as she was known in her early 20s, Celeste Miller. She had a bit of a networking habit. Before she set her sights on Julian, she was involved with a married senator's chief of staff. There were emails. Very compromising emails. The kind that could end careers. I raised an eyebrow. Blackmail. Not sophisticated enough for that. He was just messy. But it showed a pattern. She targets powerful men or men connected to power. She's a social climber, Miss Croft. A very ambitious one. He flipped a page. Then there were the financials. Your generous aunt and uncle? Not as generous as they seemed. They were funneling money from your father's company for years. Small amounts cleverly hidden. Vacation homes, tuition for Celeste's failed attempts at various degrees. All paid for with Croft money. I gave Julian the evidence. He thought it was amusing. Said it showed initiative. I felt a fresh wave of disgust. They'd been parasites, all of them. And Julian had admired their leeching. But the real gem, Silas said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, is from about 5 years ago. Around the time she moved in with you. There was an incident. A hit and run. A cyclist was seriously injured. A witness got a partial plate. It traced back to a rental car paid for by your uncle's corporate card. The one he used for Croft Industries business. I stared at him, my blood running cold. I remembered that. A young man, a promising musician, had been left with permanent brain damage. The case had gone unsolved. It had been a minor news story for a week. Celeste was driving, Silas said, his eyes locked on mine. She panicked. She drove home and told her parents. Your uncle called Julian. Not the police. Julian. He let that sink in. Julian made a call. The witness reconsidered their statement. The partial plate was lost. The case went away. Julian paid for the family's silence. A monthly, charitable donation that's still being paid out of a hidden account to this day. He considered it the cost of doing business. For love. I sat back, the pieces clicking into a horrifying mosaic. The stolen ideas, the embezzlement, the moral corruption, and now this. A covered-up crime. A life ruined. All swept under the rug by Julian to protect his precious, pure soulmate. I need copies, I said, my voice hoarse. Everything. The financial records, the witness statement, the bank transfers for the payoffs. Everything. Silas smiled his oily smile. That'll cost more than what's in that envelope, Miss Croft. This is premium-grade ammunition. Name your price. An hour later, I walked out of that office with a digital copy of every dirty secret Silas Crow had ever dug up on my cousin. It was more than I'd hoped for. It wasn't just business fraud. It was a felony. It was human tragedy. I didn't go back to my office. I went home. I needed to be somewhere quiet, somewhere safe, to process the depth of their depravity. I had known they were thieves and liars. I hadn't known they were monsters. The Croft villa was quiet. My father was at his club. I poured myself a stiff drink and stood in the living room, staring at the family portraits on the mantel. There we were, a happy, smiling family. And there, hovering at the edge of every picture, was Celeste, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. The doorbell rang, shattering the silence. I frowned. I wasn't expecting anyone. I went to the door and opened it. And there she was. Celeste. She looked terrible. The carefully constructed beauty was gone, replaced by a pale, drawn face. Her eyes were red and puffy from crying, but this time the tears looked real. She was shivering in a thin coat, the drizzle from earlier having soaked her hair. Isabella, she breathed, her voice cracking. Please. We need to talk. I didn't move. I just stood there, blocking the doorway, the file from Silas burning a hole in my mind. We have nothing to talk about, Celeste. Please, she begged, her composure breaking. It's Julian. He's lost his mind. The things he's saying to the press. He's destroying himself. He's destroying both of us. So that was it. Her puppet was breaking his strings and his flailing was damaging her too. She wasn't here out of concern for him. She was here to save her own skin. And that's my problem because? I asked, my voice icy. Because you did this, she cried, her desperation turning to accusation. You broke him. You took everything from him. From us. You need to fix it. You need to give him something, anything to make him stop talking. A job, a consulting fee, just enough to shut him up. I actually laughed, a short, harsh sound. You think I should pay him to be quiet? After everything? What else are you going to do? She spat, her mask of vulnerability slipping to reveal the venom beneath. Let him drag us all down? He's telling them everything, Isabella. About how I took your ideas, about how he knew about the arrangements. He's got nothing left to lose. This was it. The moment. She had walked right into my parlor. Come in, Celeste, I said, my voice suddenly quiet. She looked surprised, then hopeful, thinking she'd gotten through to me. She stepped inside, dripping water on the polished floor. I closed the door behind her and turned to face her. I didn't offer her a seat. I didn't offer her a towel. You're right, I said. He's talking. And it's a problem. But not for the reasons you think. I walked to the side table and picked up my tablet. I pulled up the first document from Silas's file, the financial records showing her family's embezzlement. I turned the screen to her. Her face went white. She recognized the accounts immediately. This is just the start, Celeste, I said softly. This is from 5 years ago. Your parents stealing from mine. Small change really. I swiped to the next document. The emails between her and the senator's aide. Her face crumpled further. How did you get this?" she whispered. I ignored her and swiped again. To the police report about the hit and run. The witness statement. The bank records showing Julian's charitable payments to the victim's family. Her hand flew to her mouth. Her eyes widened in pure, unadulterated terror. This was the one she thought was buried forever. "You were driving," I stated, my voice flat and cold. "You left a young man to die on the side of the road. And then you, your parents, and your lover covered it up." She started to tremble violently. I didn't. It was an accident. "It was a crime," I corrected her. "And covering it up was another crime. And the payments to the family? That's hush money. That's conspiracy. That's years in prison, Celeste. For you. For your parents. And for Julian if I decide to include him." Tears of real fear now streamed down her face. "Please. Isabella, please, we're family." "No," I said, the word final and absolute. "We are not family. You are a thief, a liar, and a criminal. And you have exactly one chance to avoid spending the next decade in a cell." She looked at me, her eyes begging. "You're going to leave this city. Tonight. You are going to take your parents and you are going to disappear. You will never contact me, my father, or anyone in my circle again. You will never speak to a reporter again. You will never write a book. You will vanish." But we have no money," she stammered. "That is not my problem," I said coldly. "The money you stole from my father should last you a while if you're frugal. Consider it your severance package." And if I don't?" she asked, a last flicker of defiance in her eyes. I smiled. It was not a nice smile. "Then I release all of this to the press and the district attorney. I will personally testify against you. I will make sure you are convicted. And I will ensure you serve every single day of your maximum sentence in the worst prison I can find. The choice is yours." The defiance died. She crumpled, sinking to her knees on the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. The puppeteer was broken, her strings cut. I felt nothing. No pity. No triumph. Just a cold, clean emptiness. "Get out of my house," I said. "And remember my terms. I'll be watching." She scrambled to her feet, not looking at me, and fled out the door into the rain. I stood there for a long time listening to the silence. It was over. The last loose thread had been tied off. The next morning, a brief article appeared in the business section. Celeste Stone, former associate of disgraced businessman Julian Vance, has left the city for an extended overseas trip with her family, according to sources. There was no fanfare. No drama. They were just gone. With the source of the poisonous narratives eliminated, the media circus around Julian began to die down almost immediately. Without Celeste feeding them stories, without a new villain to pit against me, his breakdown became old news, a sad footnote. The world moved on. A week later, my assistant informed me that a package had arrived for me. It was a small plain box. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a single worn key. There was no note. It was the key to the beach house. Our beach house. The one Julian and I had bought in the first year of our marriage, when we were poor but happy, when dreams were enough. The place we had promised each other we'd grow old in. He was returning it, letting it go. Or perhaps in his own broken way apologizing. I held the cold metal in my hand for a moment, remembering a different man, a different life. Then I walked to my balcony and threw the key as far as I could into the garden below. It disappeared into the rose bushes. I didn't look back. The war was over. I had won. The empire was mine, the enemies were vanquished, the past was buried. Now it was time to build the future. Victory, I quickly learned, was not a destination but a new landscape to be managed. The silence after the storm was not empty. It was filled with the immense responsibility of what I had seized. The Vance Group, now merged with the core of Croft Industries and streamlined under the new banner of Ethelred Croft, was a colossal entity. It was my empire, won through blood, sweat, and a second chance, and it demanded everything I had. My days were no longer about dismantling or defending. They were about building. The purge Gavin and I had initiated was brutal but effective. The old, corrupt guard was gone, replaced by a new generation of sharp, ethical executives I headhunted from around the globe. The company's culture began to shift from one of cutthroat ambition to one of fierce, intelligent innovation. Solaris was integrated seamlessly, its user base, swollen from the Skynet migration, becoming the cornerstone of the new empire's public face. Uncle Cashin, his health slowly improving away from the stress of corporate battle, became my most trusted advisor and the chairman of the board. His steady hand and vast network were invaluable. My father, Alistair, retired fully, finally at peace, spending his days in his garden or at his club, his pride in me a tangible thing that warmed me from the inside out. And then there was Leo. His spring break visit was awkward at first, a minefield of unspoken history and the ghost of the son I'd lost in another life. He was quieter, more observant than the brash boy I remembered. He stayed in his old room and we navigated each other carefully, like two diplomats from formerly warring nations. The breakthrough came on his third night. We were sitting in the library after dinner, a fire crackling in the hearth. He called me, Leo said suddenly, staring into the flames. Dad. I put down my book. What did he say? He was rambling. About conspiracies. About how you and Uncle Cashin and some shadowy group had orchestrated everything to ruin him. He shook his head, a sad, weary gesture that was too old for his face. He asked me for money. Said he was onto a big deal, that he could turn it all around if he just had some capital. My heart ached for him. This was the burden I had wanted to spare him. What did you tell him? I told him no. Leo looked at me, his eyes clear. I told him I had to focus on my studies. And I told him to get help. He swallowed hard. He called me a pathetic puppet. Said I was just like you. I'm sorry, Leo. Don't be, he said, his voice firming. After that call it was like a fog cleared. I finally saw it. The person he became when he didn't get his way. The person he must have always been underneath it all. He met my gaze. Grandpa told me what you did. How you built his companies for him. How he took the credit. All of it. I didn't do it for credit, I said softly. I know, he replied. You did it for us. For our family. He gave me a small, hesitant smile. You're not boring, Mom. You're the strongest person I know. It was the absolution I hadn't known I needed. The bridge between us was no longer fragile. It was being rebuilt with steel and understanding. He started asking me about the business, about Solaris, his engineering mind fascinated by the problems we were solving. By the time he left to go back to Stanford, a new ease existed between us. He was my son again. With my personal world stabilizing, my focus turned entirely to the future of Ethel Redcroft. I launched an aggressive philanthropic arm focused on funding STEM education for underprivileged girls, a quiet tribute to my mother and the legacy she never got to fulfill. The press, ever fickle, began to change its tune. The Ice Queen narrative was slowly replaced by The Architect, a title I found far more fitting. One evening, 6 months after the summit, I was working late in my office. The city was a blanket of lights below me. The silence was broken by my assistant. Miss Croft, a Mr. Chin is here to see you. He says it's urgent. Chin. I hadn't seen him since our sushi lunch. Send him in. He entered, looking as sharp and composed as ever, but there was a new tension around his eyes. He didn't sit. Isabella, he said, dispensing with pleasantries. I've just come from the airport. I have a plane waiting. I'm leaving the country for a while. This was unexpected. Business or pleasure? A bit of both. Mostly it's an extended vacation. He paused, choosing his words carefully. But before I left, I felt I owed you a piece of information. A courtesy between rivals. I gestured for him to continue. It's about Julian, he said, his voice neutral. He's left the city. I made sure of it. I went still. Made sure how? The debt he owed me was substantial. He had nothing left to sell but one thing. Liam's face was impassive. His story. He was shopping a memoir. A tell-all. My life with the Ice Queen. How Isabella Croft stole my empire. Pitched to every sleazy publisher that would take his call. A cold knot formed in my stomach. I thought I'd silenced him by silencing Celeste. I'd underestimated his bottomless capacity for self-destruction and vengeance. I acquired the manuscript, Liam said casually, as if he were talking about buying a newspaper. All copies. And the digital files. I then called in the final marker on his debt. The terms were simple. He gets on a plane to a less prominent country and he never speaks to a journalist or publisher again. In return, the debt is forgiven. He agreed. He's gone. I stared at him, stunned. Why would you do that? Liam allowed himself a small, cold smile. Because, Isabella, you and I are alike. We appreciate order. We build. He only knew how to break. His continued presence was a messy, unpredictable variable. I removed it. He tilted his head. Besides, the Ice Queen narrative was starting to damage share prices. My shares now. It was a sound business decision. It was also a warning. A reminder that Liam Chin was not my friend. He was a predator who had simply found a bigger predator to align with for now. He had taken care of a problem, but he had also demonstrated that he could and would act unilaterally in what he perceived as his interests. I see, I said, my voice equally cool. Thank you for the courtesy. He nodded. I expect we'll be doing business again, Isabella. Under more pleasant circumstances. He turned and left as quietly as he had arrived. I stood there for a long time looking out at the city. Julian was gone. Truly gone. Not dead but erased. It was a more final ending than I had imagined. There was no closure, no last dramatic confrontation. Just a quiet financial transaction that wiped him from the board. It was over. The following month, we held the official launch gala for the new Ethelredcroft headquarters. It was a glittering, triumphant affair. The who's who of the business world were there, not out of morbid curiosity but out of genuine respect. I wore a gown the color of champagne, and for the first time I felt not like an imposter or an avenger, but like I belonged exactly where I was. I gave a speech not about defeat but about the future. About building something lasting and meaningful. The applause was thunderous. Afterward, as I circulated through the crowd, I felt a light tap on my shoulder. I turned to find Gavin Vance, looking happier and more confident than I'd ever seen him. Quite a night, he said, smiling. It is, I agreed. He hesitated, uncharacteristically nervous. I have a date. Met her at the new investors meeting. She's a biomedical engineer. Brilliant woman. Doesn't care about the family name at all. He blushed slightly. I just wanted to say, thank you, Isabella. For seeing something in me that no one else did. Not even my father. You earned it, Gavin, I said sincerely. You've been indispensable. I watched him melt back into the crowd and I felt a deep sense of rightness. The Vance name, once synonymous with corruption and cruelty, was being redeemed by its gentlest air. I found myself drawn to the quiet of the terrace overlooking the city. The night air was cool and clean. I leaned against the railing, looking out at the empire I had built from the ashes. Uncle Cashin joined me, handing me a fresh glass of champagne. Penny for your thoughts, niece. I took the glass. I was just thinking about foundations, I said. How the strongest ones are often built on the rubble of the old. He followed my gaze out over the skyline. He would have hated this, you know, Cashin said quietly. Julian. He never wanted to build anything. He only wanted to own it. To have his name on it. There's a difference. I know, I whispered. We stood in comfortable silence for a while, two architects surveying their work. What's next, Isabella? He asked. You've conquered the city. What does the architect do once the building is complete? I smiled, a genuine, peaceful smile. I looked down at the city not as a kingdom to be ruled, but as an ecosystem to be nurtured. I saw the universities we were funding, the tech incubators we were launching, the clean energy projects we were pioneering. She doesn't stop, I said. She finds a new foundation to lay. The past was a closed book. A painful, brutal, necessary lesson. The man who had watched me drown was a ghost in another country. The woman who had stolen my life had vanished into obscurity. The son I had lost was coming back to me. I had won. Not just the battle but the right to define what victory meant. It wasn't about vengeance anymore. It wasn't even about power. It was about legacy. And mine was just beginning. The end.